Hey, it's me, Rob Ryan, and I am back with this week's latest episode of Entrepreneurial Thinkers, and this one is fascinating. If you have ever thought to yourself about space as an industry, or about defense technology, or here in the United States, if you've ever thought about how is it that who's funding that, like where are these innovations coming from that are putting the rockets or the satellites or the communication technologies or the drones up into space or out into our national defense mechanisms. How is that happening? Who's behind it? You're going to want to listen to this episode with Roxanne Aragon from DTI here in Los Angeles as we talk all things space innovation, the space industry, as well as the defense technology industry and how it is rooted here in Los Angeles as a deep-seated part of our overall broader entrepreneurial economy. We learn about Space Force. We learn about NASA. We learn about the Department of Defense. We learn about the billions of dollars that are available for innovators, entrepreneurs, engineers, and inventors like you all that are listening. And we also uncover a lot of magical investment opportunities for follow-on investors from the private sector. So all you venture investors, private equity guys that are listening, this is a fantastic episode for you to learn about this industry and find the key influencer that is the gateway to this industry here in Los Angeles through my friend Roxanne Aragon. So Roxanne and I hope that you enjoy this episode as much as we did making it for you.
We are so grateful to be supported by these community champions: Sales MD, Team Friday, Realist Lab, Kiana Patterson, Diego Chavez, Jer Boucher, Heather Ryder, Janine Sua, Lily Roca, and Steve Kernan.
Hola, hello, hi, bienvenido, and welcome back, or maybe your first time with us. Welcome to Entrepreneurial Thinkers, and you may or may not know, this is the show where I get the privilege to have weekly conversations with some of the best and brightest entrepreneurial thinkers across all sectors and segments of society and industry as we come together to try and do, as my mom always implored me as I was a little kid, to just try to leave the world a little bit better than we found it before we had this conversation. Today, I am super excited to be joined by my friend Roxanne Aragon, Program Director at DTI, which is Disruptive Technology Index, the organization here in Los Angeles. She's going to tell us a lot more about that. It just has a really cool sounding name. I already am kind of excited to learn more about it later. But let me tell you first about Roxanne before I welcome her onto the show. She's someone who doesn't build rockets, but if you've ever wondered who actually decides which rockets or drones or airships or satellites or weapon systems actually make it out of the lab and into orbit, she's one of those people. Roxanne lives at this fascinating intersection of startups, government, and private and public capital, helping founders translate bold ideas into real contracts with NASA, the DoD, and beyond. Over the course of her career, she's worked everywhere from Los Alamos National Labs to the University of New Mexico. She's designed accelerator programs, shaped entire innovation ecosystems, and quietly helped move hundreds of millions of dollars into the future of space and defense. She's a loving mom, a great partner, a very proud Lobo and New Mexican, a Fighting Irish of Notre Dame alum, and one of the really key industry influencers here in Los Angeles. And, you know, if you've ever thought that the system feels impossible to navigate, Roxanne is probably the one who knows where the doors are, holds the keys, and actually knows which doors are worth opening. So with that, I say, welcome to Entrepreneurial Thinkers, Roxanne. It's so awesome to have you here today.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for the welcome, Rob.
It's an absolute pleasure. I said to you off air as we were getting ready to start that this is kind of in my mind as the conversationalist who eagerly looks forward to having conversations. This one's kind of been in my mind for a couple of years because although you've changed kind of what you were doing, where you were doing it over the course of our friendship here in Los Angeles, you are still in the space of space, which we're going to talk a lot more about lately. And it's an industry, it's a sector of our entrepreneurial economy that I am absolutely curious to learn more about. And since I'm the proxy for our audience, we're going to go with that today. So I'm super excited. I'm grateful for you to be here. Thank you again. I'm going to kick us off with one kind of big picture question before we get into a lot of the detail and nuance of what you do. But how is it that our government might just be one of the most innovative organizations on earth?
Wow. Well, they do have some money, I guess. And so you can thank yourself and the, citizens that have come before us and all the taxpayers for funding some of those, actually many of the investments that have gone into small businesses, for decades at this point. And so, I feel very fortunate to be one of the folks who help in many ways the government figure out how to get the funding that they have for innovative research and development into the hands of some of our best and brightest engineers and business people across the U.S. So, in terms of the roots have been in place for quite some time, and like it or not, a lot of the roots have come out of investments that have been made into our large defense industry. That's really how Silicon Valley got a lot of its start in the early days, was through defense funding. And so it continues to be, the funding that's propped up the internet, made that possible, makes the GPS that's on your phone possible, and ensures a lot of our national security along the way. And so a lot of kind of the peace and prosperity that we have at this day and age is attributable to a lot of the investments that have been made by the U.S. government over the years.
Yeah.
Not to over, try and be too patriotic, I guess. But some of the realities is that it comes from that pot of funding.
Yeah. No, that's 100% true. I love that you tell that part of the story about essentially kind of the roots of Silicon Valley. I for years, as we know, as we've met each other and gotten to know each other, like I spent most of the last decade around Latin America, working on helping build entrepreneurial economies in local communities around Latin America. And one of the kind of slides and tags I had in a speech that I gave that was kind of like around the idea of, stop trying to be the next Silicon Valley, just build the next best version of, fill in the name of the city or town that we were in that country. And I would have to go back and tell that root story of, if not for the defense industry or the U.S. government Department of Defense and initiatives both during World War II and then post World War II, like Silicon Valley wouldn't be what it ever probably became. It might have become something different, and it might have been similar, but it wouldn't have become the root that it became. And everybody has that perception, right? That Silicon Valley is just a bunch of like software, cool tech bro guys, like our current culture. And I'm like, no, it was basically just research scientists and like hard tech, hard science people back in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. That's awesome. All right. So a little bit about you, because I want to kind of set the stage for everything we're going to learn together because of your experiences in these different parts of this industry. But like, you work, as I said in the intro, right, kind of at this fascinating intersection of what I call the entrepreneurial economy, venture investment, big government, and then, as I just said, like real science, like hard technology, hard sciences stuff. And so I'm really curious, before we get into all those different things, how did you find your way into this world? And maybe like, what do you love about it that you stay?
Yeah, so it's funny that you mentioned Latin America, because I was actually a Latin Americanist in college. Very much was interested in economic development, political science, but I kind of felt like I didn't have like I never felt like I had a good tool set for actually to implement some of the ideas I had, until I came across a program at the business school at Notre Dame that really kind of changed my way of thinking in terms of how I personally wanted to, work towards some of those international development and economic development goals and ideas. And so, it was right around the time that microfinance was a big thing, that I got involved with a program called Social Entrepreneur Corps as an intern, and they were essentially, teaching women how to sell eyeglasses in their communities in rural Ecuador, rural Guatemala. And I just thought it was so fascinating how really simple business principles could empower people to kind of to forge their own pathway and really have a lot of economic security, build for their families. And so it felt very much like the movie Good Will Hunting, where, he talks about, well, you spent $150K on this degree. I did it in, $150 in library fees. Business education felt very much like something that was so easy to scale, and just give people access to. And so that's kind of fundamentally been my pathway ever since then. And so I've done this in the creative industries. It also brought me into, like you mentioned, Los Alamos National Laboratories. And in one of my first meetings there, I sat down, and that experience in Latin America rang so true in the sense that the part of my brain that struggled to interpret during a meeting that I was having in Spanish or in Portuguese, I was having that same feeling in the first few meetings I was having with these researchers and technologists, where my brain was just grappling to try and understand these concepts, understand the language. And that was really the first time that it hit me that, in many ways it is just a translation and interpretation job and skill. And from them, from the success we had in the creative industries in New Mexico, I got asked to help lead a program out of New Mexico called the Hyperspace Challenge, where I had no background in working in the space industry, but that was actually the point. And so the folks at the Air Force at the time kind of took a chance on me and wanted someone who thought a little bit differently, because the whole role was about bringing companies in who had never worked in the space industry before. And so, one of my favorite stories there is a local New Mexican company at the time. They had been building AI and machine learning technology to detect cancer in the human body. We were able to put them together with NASA, and they developed a way to predict failure aboard small satellites. So that was the perfect example of kind of reframing problems that would have kind of stayed within the Air Force Research Lab or something like that, making them public to a broader community and letting them bring their, genius and understanding to a problem. So
Amazing.
That's what makes me stay, is I can see the impact. It is really fun and rewarding.
And shout out to the Air Force people at that time for seeking out, they didn't know it because they didn't meet me and they didn't know this is what I was going to call it decades later, but like seeking out an entrepreneurial thinker, right? Seeking out someone who was thinking differently about the sector that they were interested in trying to draw attention to. And then you essentially, again, that's one of the reasons I was excited to have you on the show, because you, to me, epitomize what I am aspiring to kind of help people understand, is that, again, we don't just need more entrepreneurs or investors only. Like, we need more entrepreneurial thinkers in every sector and segment, because it's the people like you that then, as you say, I like your way that you liken it to translator, right? Like almost, I was going to say facilitator, right? You're this conductor that ties together these people that, like, hey, okay, this is an amazing solution you have in your story that you just shared, but are there other ways you could apply that solution? And then, the smart, nerdy engineer guys are like, well, yeah, of course there are, right? And like they just haven't focused on that. And then you're like, oh, well, then meet these people, and maybe, and then all of a sudden now you've got a commercial enterprise out of something that those guys may not have commercialized forever or for a long period of time. And that's incredible. I'm curious, because you are going to be our guide in this sense now into this world today in this conversation. So you work at this nexus of things that a lot of people outside of you and I might say just normally appear to be complicated or convoluted or hard to digest, right? Like startups, the startup world, or government, or investors. Are there any big, or what is maybe the big misconceptions that you see that each of those different constituents have about each other?
Oh, that's a complicated question, but it's, top to bottom, I think one of the most challenging things in this space, as it pertains to startups, is you alluded to it a little bit earlier around the idea of a software startup versus a hardware startup, and just the complexities associated with hardware as a baseline. And then if you take that into space, you're dealing with the complexities of hardware in space, both getting to space, surviving in space, whether it's the radiation, the temperature fluctuations, the I don't know, the fact that you're in space, you can't plug it back in once it's up there. So all of those things add so much complexity that, when we think about sometimes the speed and agility of a startup founder, a lot of the things we think about that tend to be associated come from software founders, where really hardware is a whole different ball game. And so there's a lot of venture capitalists that sometimes, if they're new to the hard tech or the deep tech space, they bring in their preconceived notions of when returns need to be made. And then there's the government of it all. So the government is obviously incredibly complex. It's not one customer. It's not one person. Everyone is so different within the entire, not just the federal government, within the Department of Defense, or now the Department of War, within the agencies within the Department of War. And so across all of it, the complexity is intense. The bureaucracy is real, which is another thing that can be really challenging for startups. Is the same way that you might think of a business to business type sale, like you'd have layers of different account managers and customers and sign-offs. It's even harder when you get into these government programs. And so there is so much that has to be learned. And so I think that the misconceptions abound, the frustrations abound. Generally, up until now, we're also dealing with some really big, massive challenges, in the sense that, the government traditionally has been a very good customer, and it still continues to be a very good customer, but we're dealing with things like government shutdowns, I'm sure we'll talk about the SBIR reauthorization that needs to happen in Congress. And so it's a particularly volatile time to be doing business with the government, who has traditionally been, a really solid customer once you have them.
Yeah, uncertainties mixed with huge bureaucracies, not a good combination.
We are so grateful to be supported by sponsors like our friends at Plaintext Capital. Investing in Web3 and cryptocurrencies isn't about jumping on the latest trends. It's about understanding where the market is headed and why. Plaintext Capital is a digital asset investment firm focused on long-term strategies backed by deep research, backing the best Web3 companies and protocols, and investing in the newest asset classes of the future. They believe that Web3 crypto will drive digital innovation for decades to come, creating significant value for investors. In fact, their team of highly skilled professionals work with institutions and serious individual investors who want clarity in a space full of hype and noise. So if you're looking to cut through the chaos and invest with purpose, Plaintext Capital brings a disciplined, high-conviction approach to investing. You can learn more and meet the team at plaintextcapital.com.
You just used a word, and that's going to be a great segue to this next question. So I want to kind of veer from the conversation for a second, because I think throughout the conversation, we're probably going to reference a bunch of acronyms, a bunch of different things. And so I wonder if you can help me.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's not it's the industry you live in that I am curious about. So let's do this. we're going to rattle through some acronyms, and you can just tell us what they are. We won't have to dive into each one of them. We can just kind of give a glossary of terms, so to speak, for our listeners and viewers today, just so that we can have kind of a baseline as we go forward. So first things first, you just did mention it, this SBIR or dash SBIR and STTR seem like every time I read about them or see you post about them, those two things are combined. So just quickly, kind of definitionally, what is that?
Yeah, these are the Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer. They're grants from the U.S. government. They're administered across 11 different agencies. So it's not just Department of War. It also includes, I think the next biggest pot of money comes from the National Health and Human Services. But these are dollars that are dedicated to small businesses. How that's currently defined is businesses that have fewer than 500 people, and they have to be U.S. owned for-profit entities. But so any company that generally fits in that bucket is eligible for. Last year, it was about $4 billion in funding that's dedicated to small business research and development.
Okay.
STTR, you have to have a research institution as a partner, but other than that, again, it's really carved out for small businesses.
And real quick on that, research institutions as partners, those research institutions would be universities,
Tend to be universities. Yep.
Okay.
Usually universities, can be labs, can be some nonprofits are accredited essentially as research institutions. And so
Okay.
it has to be split, though. At least 30% of the work has to be done by that research institution. And that's usually, again, technology transfers in the name. So usually it's intended to help companies take technologies that have maybe been developed in a lab and mature them to where they get to a prototype.
Awesome. Okay, and there's a phrase we're going to use throughout here: dual use technology. Explain what that is.
Yeah, so dual use technology, it's really a technology that has a commercial market and a government market. There's going to be people that might not love that definition, but without it being too meaningfully redesigned for one or the other. So ideally, like a dual use product would be something that has both, a commercial customer and a government customer at the end of the day.
Okay, cool. And these next couple are going to sound stupid and obvious, but just for folks, we have all kinds of different folks from all kinds of different places that listen. NASA stands for
the National Administration. No, oh my gosh, I'm going to get this one
National
wrong.
Space, right? Is it aeronautics?
National Aeronautic and Space
Administration. Probably, right?
Thank
okay,
you.
so that is now different.
Yes,
that is now different than Space Force.
Correct. And so the Space Force does in fact exist. It exists under the Department of the Air Force. So NASA is a civilian organization, civilian-led organization that's mandated to do exploration and science primarily, whereas the Space Force's mandate is national defense. So it's keeping an advantage in space on behalf of the U.S. And so obviously NASA does a lot of the Mars missions, and that's kind of been their mandate moving forward is kind of Mars and beyond.
Yeah, right. And it's going to be a great segue to the next thing I want to ask you after we finish these last couple of acronyms. Actually, I'll handle this last acronym because I'm pretty sure of it, and then you can tell me if I'm wrong. So the acronym that I wanted to ask about, this is not a politically charged question by nature, but it kind of is now, right, is DOD, because that is littered throughout the industry. And in the past, up until like this last couple months, we would have called that the Department of Defense. Right? And now that same department would now be, I guess, technically the DOW in documents, although I bet all the documents haven't been updated to reflect that change yet. So, okay, I won't make you comment on that one any further than that. We'll just leave that, right?
That is correct. And so I guess the comment we can make is that the positive coming out of this in some ways, in terms of, like I mentioned, there's a lot of change, but there is a big shift towards commercial and commercial off-the-shelf technologies and not building bespoke programs for everything that the Department of War or Defense, you're right either way at this point in time. It's still, both are accurate, but that this is all part of a much bigger effort to kind of regenerate and reframe what that organization does moving forward.
Yeah, and that as you explained that part there, and that's hugely important to the work that you do, to the industry that you're in, right, and to this just commercialization of new ideas and new technologies that come from entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial innovators inside of universities and research labs, as opposed to just from the however many few 2, 3, 4 major defense contractors that there are still that have existed since World War II. Which is always a good thing. So, all right. So thank you for the glossary of terms. As we get back into the conversation now, indulge me for a second, right? I'm old enough to remember a world in which we huddled around our TV sets and we watched breathlessly as NASA, the United States, tried to compete with our then political rivals to put men into space, right? And we staked out our leadership position in innovation and kind of geopolitical chess. But today, it seems, from just a citizen standpoint right now, me as Rob, citizen podcaster, right? It seems like we've outsourced all of this and I am probably being exaggerative in this, and you can rein me back in, right? But it seems like we've outsourced all of this to the private sector. And I'm curious, are we, much along the lines of what you just said there in that last answer, are we now much more of, as a governmental entity and as NASA specifically, like, is the space part of what our government does now much more of kind of a consumer of everyone else's innovations and less so like the innovator ourselves? I have no idea if this is my interpretation is accurate or not, so you can help us understand this.
So we're on the cusp of that transition. And so it's a transition that's been happening basically over the last 20 years in full effect, I would say, where the government very much has been trying to seed a commercial space industry to make space easier to access, to make it more affordable, and to not make the government dependent on all the costs associated with getting to space. And so obviously the pioneer in this was SpaceX, making reusable rockets. And I think, it is a great way to think about maybe, again, some of those misconceptions about what the government can and can't do. When you talk about working with the government, oftentimes, their incentive structures are to mitigate risk at any way possible. And, especially if you think about like the military, if they mitigate risk, because if they don't, that means lives lost. When you think about NASA, it's kind of the same thing. The stakes are tremendous, the amounts of money are tremendous, and the political pressures are tremendous. So if and when anything goes wrong, there's really no margin that allows them to make these errors that you can make in the commercial space. And so I think SpaceX really is a demonstration of that, where they have had obviously numerous failures along the way, but it got to an end result that is tremendously successful. And so there has been very much an effort to try and seed this commercial industry, specifically in space, because it didn't exist very long ago. It was only the government going to space. And so it's really expensive. It's not a cost-effective way to get back to space.
Interesting. That's fascinating. I wasn't going to ask this, but you just made me think of this, like, for whatever insights you may or may not have, like, what are our geopolitical peers or competitors like doing? Are other countries commercializing, privatizing space in the same way that we are, or are they all still like government centric driven?
Absolutely.
Interesting. Okay.
So, I think there is still, space is very much, we talked about dual use. Space is still very much a dual use market, perhaps less so for some of the things, especially some of the things that have been around a little bit longer. So one of those being, getting Earth observational data from space. So, it's been a few decades now that, private companies sent up enough satellites that you can get really fast and accurate details just about anything in the world, so you can, equity markets and financial systems use this information because they can tell by, how heavy all the tankers are in China, how full they are, what oil prices may be. You can tell by the color of the leaves in Iowa what crop yields may be. So that has found definitely very commercial niches and functions. But we have a ton of allied nations that we work closely with. I think the Norwegians, the UK, obviously, the entire European Space Agency. And beyond that, though, our adversaries, that's a huge part of what we're doing in space, is spending time to figure out what they're doing in space. So it's a bold new world.
Right. That's kind of our theme. Has persisted beyond everything else that's been going on for the last 100 years. But that's fascinating. We talked about it in your intro, right? You're a proud New Mexican, right? Like that, and that as someone who at one point early in my career sold hardware and then software into New Mexico as part of my territory, so to speak. Like, I quickly learned as a young enterprise B2B government type sales guy how much of New Mexico's economy is consumed by / driven by government and government. Like basically, it was like I had a commercial territory that had like 7 states in it, and then my boss said, and then you have New Mexico, and that's a whole different set of discussions and opportunities and relationship skills, Rob. So go figure that out, right? So you come from there. That's kind of in your DNA at some level, and obviously you have like not just grew up there, but like you've worked in that arena. You understand the entrepreneurial economy and the governmental traditional economy of New Mexico, and you live here in Los Angeles, and we've got this thing that I don't necessarily know that the rest of the world really fully appreciates has been going on here for a long time, but now is kind of like been reborn again, which is down in neighborhoods like El Segundo, and of course all over the place, Long Beach, and like all over the whole of Southern California and the greater Los Angeles area. So tell me, like, as someone who kind of grew up in a government culture, like, tell me what it is that is special about Los Angeles, and like, how do you see the space and defense technology industry continuing to play as like a bigger piece of our broader economy as we go forward into the future? We are so grateful to be supported by sponsors like our friends at Haney and Company. You know, we all know that in today's complex financial landscape, having a trusted advisor can make all the difference. Since 1960, Haney and Company has been providing comprehensive accounting services to a diverse range of clients, from small businesses to large corporations. With nearly 400 professionals across 13 locations, they offer services in tax, audit, business consulting, and client advisory. In fact, their commitment to excellence has earned them recognition from Accounting Today and Forbes magazines. At Haney and Company, though, it's not just about balancing books. It's about building lasting relationships based on trust and mutual growth. So visit HaneyCPAs.com. That's HaneyCPAs.com to learn how they can support your business's financial journey.
Yeah, one thing that's so great about Los Angeles is I think that the roots in aerospace and in this hardware and development and manufacturing have been laid here for so long, in some of those major contractors, the Boeings, the Northrops of the world, and then which led to SpaceX being here as well. And so many of the founders that we see launching new space startups are coming out of these places. And so there's such a deep wealth of knowledge, of education, of kind of knowing the ins and outs of how to solve these problems and the networks associated, that it's really, I mean, at a tremendous advantage compared to the rest of the world when it comes to really bright people being here and working on these problems. And so, I mean, I don't think that there's anywhere that's matched in terms of the heritage of, you know, both building, whether it's in aviation or actually building for space. It's just, this is where people are building it right now.
That's awesome. I mean, in that sense, just to lean on that other trope, right? It's almost the pieces of the Silicon Valley, so to speak, like there were anchor pieces of Silicon Valley that created that opportunity, and then those anchors still existed, so it persists. And so, as you just said, kind of by comparison, right, there were anchor pieces of the defense, aeronautics, space, technology, defense, like here, that existed because of World War II, effectively, and government decisions to leverage what was then kind of open, clean air, blue skies, and not as populated, right? But those fundamentals stayed and are still here, and that anchors this for the next 100 years, hypothetically. And now the encouraging part is like, and I'll use the phrase that gets used in like social media, all these like young tech bros, right, that are all down in El Segundo, right, and they're all set up shop, and they've fomented this whole like hype machine around themselves and the neighborhood, which again, I could care less one way or the other, because it's part of the greater Los Angeles area, and that means they just found their way to like the Mecca. And the Mecca is going to continue to be the Mecca regardless of the age of the people that are doing it. And you just essentially confirmed that.
Yeah, and I mean, and other factors that are really important too, Space Systems Command, which actually, you know, when you talk about, again, the complexities of the government, the entire Space Force is all over the United States, but Space Systems Command makes a whole lot of the purchasing decisions for the U.S. Space Force. They're, you know, in El Segundo. We have NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory over in Pasadena as well. I mean, a lot of the folks who are the ones who have been doing this for so long are here. And to your point, the space industry, it's still nascent enough that, 5 years ago when I moved here from New Mexico, I was so nervous to go to my first, LA space meetup. And I knew almost everyone there already from the conference circuit. So it's a welcoming community. It's building and growing, to be sure. But yeah, it's not always just what's the gundo of it all, It goes
No,
a
it's
little
not.
deeper than that.
And by the way, given evidence, I've yet to have a Gundo bro on this show, and I've got you as my first choice to help us understand the space industry in Los Angeles. So there you go. We're you and I are doing our part. All right, so let's talk. You framed this up incredibly. We've got a lot more to kind of pull apart, but let's stop here. Let's talk about your work. Let's talk about the Disruptive Technology Index, which sounds like it's like a stock market index. And so then in my brain, as I was scripting, I just keep attaching the word like the DTI organization, right? Because in my head, I was like, what does she work for? Like a stock index? Like what? So tell us this is your commercial. Tell us about DTI, which is a fascinating name. Tell us what you do, what it does. Just kind of give us kind of the pieces and parts of the business behind DTI and your clients. And then we'll talk about it a little bit further.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a very interesting case. So DTI is a nonprofit. We're based in El Segundo, but we were stood up primarily through something called a Partnership Intermediary Agreement, a PIA, if you'd like another acronym.
There we go.
Anyone
Yes.
listening can take a drink every time they hear an acronym. But so it's a really unique agreement that allows for the government to partner with nonprofits to support the commercialization and technology transfer of the companies they're working with. So under this intermediary agreement, we essentially work really closely with the Space Force and support their initiatives in several different ways. We're kind of a tool for them. One of those things is our physical location called The Bridge in El Segundo, just on Aviation. It's a 2,100 square foot collaboration space. So we hosted 90 events this past year. So it's meant to be, to answer your question most precisely, we're a collaboration and ecosystem builder. So we are maturing the space economy, and we're doing it really from any and all ways that we can come up with. And so it's been around 2 years. We host several of our own events, but we also offer the space up to the community. So SoCal Deep Tech Week hosts several of its events there. We'll likely be partnering more with them this coming year on that. We host our annual Expo Day, which supports all the companies that we work directly with through our program and through our partnership with the Space Force. So that's really, as it pertains to Los Angeles, if you're trying to get into the space industry, this is where you want to be. We have government customers, we have industry, we have all the startups coming in and out of the door and using our space. And so we encourage and invite everyone to come and be a part of that. And then on top of that, we have what I do, which is a lot of our programming, which leans more towards, we mentioned accelerator programs. I say accelerator not so much in the traditional sense, but I think more so if you think of what the Space Force does when it puts SBIR dollars into small businesses. So Space Force itself, in normal times when SBIR exists, and again, we can talk about that in more detail, but it's currently on pause.
There's a question coming.
SBIR is currently on pause.
There's a question coming up there in a second, so hang with me.
But so, for example, the last year, the Space Force was responsible for managing just under $500 million to distribute to small business through SBIR and STTR. We serve for some of the companies that they work with. There's challenge programs. That means that there's been a customer identified that are interested in the technologies and the capabilities that companies who've applied to the SBIR program are working on. And we serve kind of like the venture capital platform arm to the Space Force's investment. So if you think of these government dollars going in more so as investments instead of just kind of I mean, it is truly non-dilutive funding. The government takes nothing back in return, but you are delivering against a contract with these contracts, and so we provide everything else associated. A lot of that being how to help you figure out how to navigate working with the government and transitioning the technology so it doesn't go into the Department of Defense has its own valley of death, very similar
Right.
to the valley of death that
Sure.
exists in the commercial world. But for a long time, companies who have tried to work with the DOW have started their work, gotten these SBIR dollars, only to absolutely lose all funding before, years before they make it into someone's budget or someone's long-term, funding plans. And so everything that we're doing is about bridging that gap and about helping these companies pull through and actually deliver a capability that the government can buy at the end of the day, which, believe it or
Yeah.
not, hasn't always existed. And so the Space Force in particular has been really innovative in building out pathways to build the bridge as people are climbing over it. So
That's to your point about being different than how others in the traditional startup world, commercial side might interpret accelerators, right? Like this I would argue is like real acceleration. Like this is actual commercial acceleration, like in the best possible way, which is fascinating. Like kudos to Space Force as a government institution, as an agency, right? Smart enough to know, like, okay, we need to, like, we literally need to seed the creative activity in this area to help us like be able to acquire the technologies and the capabilities that we eventually foresee our need for. But like, we're also the government, and so we're not good at doing that. Like we can't just, like, we're not good at even hiring the type of people who would work for us and then go do that. So rather than that, we're going to use these creative partnership agreement type of scenarios to essentially literally partner with locals who are from the private sector world, who understand us, but can essentially kind of almost front for us in a way that literally, not surprisingly, you guys named it the bridge. Like, you guys are literally a bridge for them in that context, which is fascinating. So the question underlying all that is, like, were the original couple of people, or like I don't even know, on your team who was like the executive director or the founding boss or the first person from DTI, was that person like a former Space Force person or something? Like, how do you even find that person to say, like, oh yeah, I'll start this thing, we'll call it DTI?
So I love this so much because in the same it was a lot of the same people who brought me on in the first place. So it was Gabe Mounts out of AFRL New Mexico, and then Rock McMillan, who was here in LA standing this up in LA. He so it's Nicole Charlene Wilkerson, who they essentially picked to form this PIA with, the DTI founder. She has a Hollywood background, so which I think is the genius of it all.
Fascinating.
It keeps us from, we don't need more government to do more government. Our CEO now is Drew Busby. On the flip side, he was boots on the ground leading this innovation on the spacework side, this Air Force and then the spacework side. So he
Okay.
knows all the ins and outs, but it's such a compliment to have the government and completely distinct industries who understand communication and understand
Right.
how to get people into a room. It's so important to have both.
That's amazing. I'm really glad I asked that question. Thank you for that. You talked about it in this answer. We alluded to it in the beginning. So let's dive into this. You have written extensively lately about the fact that this SBIR/STTR legislative mechanism for funding is under threat because it's caught in the politics of the moment. Talk to us about why it is so critical that this passes.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I mean, this is America's innovation fund. This is truly America's seed fund. It's non-dilutive. That means the government takes no ownership. You own your technology, you own your IP. And these are the big bets on the things that end up becoming our most important innovations. That the reality is private industry isn't isn't putting the money in to build these things most of the time. And so it truly is, I think, one of the best things the government can be doing is they're making lots of small bets on companies and on small businesses to build our future. And so, I mean, it's everything. It's clean energy, it's batteries, it's sensors, it's everything that affects and impacts our day-to-day lives. All that really early stage investment into these technologies, so much of it comes through this program. So
Yeah.
there are, one of the big things that's getting it caught up is that there are companies out there who obviously some of them just know how to write a good proposal. And it's one of those things that's a challenge with any system, is once people understand how to use the system to their advantage, there are companies that, are winning lots of awards and may or may not be working towards that end goal of actually building something that gets to use, whether it be on the commercial side or on the government side. And that's really been a sticking point for the conversations in the Senate and in Congress. And I think most people would agree some reform needs to happen, but really it's let's make it happen.
Yeah. Like, hey, yeah, we're all for doing everything that we've done better, but we don't need to doge this thing with a pickaxe to like not have it be in place just because occasionally somebody does something illicit with it, right? Like that. I mean, that totally makes sense. Now I understand your passion for it when you articulate it on LinkedIn or wherever I see you posting about it, like why it's so important. And that clearly answers the question about like literally what would happen to the defense and technology space industry if that didn't exist, if it doesn't get approved. But we're not even going to go there because it clearly is going to get approved. It's just in everybody's interest. It's just they're playing politics with it from what it sounds like. I'm curious, a little tied to that though, for a second, is what's happening then the Space Force or whatever agency that's deploying the use of these SBIR, STTR grants, these non-dilutive capital investments, as you say, because they are truly investments. Does that then mitigate the risk? Does that suck a lot of the early risk out of it? So then the private capital guys, the VCs who now are like, oh, I'm a VC in defense and tech, and I'm the coolest guy ever. Like they're now following along because those SBIR investment grants have sucked out so much of the risk that those private sector guys can come along and fund the next step. Is that kind of how the industry is playing out?
That's absolutely right. And that's absolutely another thing that, we're trying to take a real leadership position in is making sure that these venture capital markets mature alongside the government market. So, like I mentioned, the SpaceWorks team, so SpaceWorks is the innovation branch that administers the SBIR funding. Like I mentioned, they're building out the pathway so that these companies who are on the right path don't fall out for no reason. And so they're doing their work on their side to improve the system. But we're trying to make sure that we make sure everyone knows about that, because sometimes when you're doing the good work, you forget to tell people. And so a lot of what we've started doing in the same way that we do outreach to small businesses, we do outreach to the venture capital community to make sure that they have clear understandings of the Space Force's priorities, whether they want to, invest and then make recommendations of companies to us and, to think about how we can help them coach them through the SBIR process or things like that. Or simultaneously, we have conversations with investors and roundtables with investors who are investing in these companies. And we make sure that we're, trying to collect the data that they need to make better informed investments. But, it's really exciting to see, especially for the LA ecosystem, Impulse Space came through the SBIR program. They're doing phenomenally. K2 Space came through the SBIR program. They just raised $250 million at a valuation of $3 billion. They're building the largest satellites ever made. So, I mean, we're really getting to a point where all this investment that happens on the back end is seeing the light of day, and it's really exciting.
No, that's amazing. There's a fun to being early in anything, right? And then you get to see those first few proof cases kind of grow up and become the example, and then everybody, right, then the herd follows, which is a fascinating. I'm curious, I have a deep-seated love for storytelling, and my eyes light up when I hear you say something like, sometimes people or organizations are really good at all the process and the navigation, and then they forget to tell anybody about it, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons I do this very thing that I do with podcasting. You yourself, like your own background, you talked about it in your opening statement, so to speak. Like, I mean, you worked inside of Creative Mornings, which Creative Mornings is like one of every creative person's favorite organizations in the world, right? It's just this incredible. I've been to so many Creative Mornings meetings in so many different cities around Latin America and the US. Like, it's just, I've never met a bad person at a Creative Mornings meeting, right? So you've been a part of that. You've been a part of, like, there was an organization in Albuquerque, creative startups, like, how does human create now that you're in this role that you're in, like, how does human creativity kind of present itself in this world that is so process, rules, risk mitigation driven, right? Like, how do those two mix together?
We are so grateful to be supported by sponsors like our friends at Chisos Capital. Everyone knows that raising capital is hard. And frankly, finding the next pool of entrepreneurs to get access to as limited investors is sometimes impossible too. Do you have a big idea, a dream you're building, but you're struggling to find early funding? Well, Chisos is changing the game for founders, creators, athletes, and investors. Whether you're launching a startup, growing your creative brand, or training for the big leagues, Chisos backs you. Chisos uniquely invests up to $100,000 in people, not just products, whether they be entrepreneurs, creators, or even athletes. With their unique CISA model, convertible income share agreements, founders get flexible funding without giving up equity or ownership, and investors get attractive returns and great upside with less risk. Chisos works for both investors and the people bringing our world to life. If you're seeking access to a truly diverse pool of deals, or you're someone who feels overlooked by the VC game, Chisos is ready to back you. So apply now at chisos.io.
I mean, it's kind of the only way to survive, like when you have so much structure and so much definition, the folks that you see who are, it's when I've always felt, a call to public service. I always thought I would do maybe the foreign service or something like that. And it's so inspiring to be around people that are so mission driven and so dedicated, and kind of despite all the structural barriers, they find a way to make an impact. And so, some of the creativity happens in really unexciting ways. There's something called the Federal Acquisition Regulation, 2,000 pages about how to work with the government, all the rules and regulations. The people who get to know that really well and can kind of learn how to weave between the lines, they're really successful in working with the government sometimes. And so, but none of the things that, make for success in any other industry, like they're all the same, and so the storytellers do win. The good stories win at the end of the day. And I think, it's always a challenge for any and all technologists and people who have developed amazing new things to obviously look beyond just the features and actually tell the story of what's possible. What are we making possible with our new inventions and our new solutions?
And I get, like, it's funny because part of my brain wants to default to, right, it's the government, it's systems, I mean, Space Force. I have family that was retired Air Force at the highest level, like, right, worked in the Pentagon. So I would hear those stories. I have friends that were also at that level in different branches of the service. And so part of my brain's just like, that's just hard and complicated and frankly, probably inefficient. But then another part of it is, as you say, like, fundamentally, this is the seed of so much innovation that, like, we wouldn't be having this conversation on this thing called the internet, right, if not for the seeds of these types of innovation. So I'm curious, like, when you're in the world of helping founders pitch, tell their story to these government stakeholders, like, are government stakeholders, government decision makers still looking for fundamentally the same, like, good storytellers or painting a picture of what's possible, like that we are in the commercial sector? Or is there some kind of unspoken hidden signal that decision makers on the government end of things, purchasers on the government, like have to seek out that's totally different than what we experience on the commercial side for a founder?
Yeah. So I think that, look, we're talking about different languages. That's a fact. And we're also talking about
That's a
what
great
we
way to
got
put
back
it.
to at the beginning, that they're, yeah, different languages. I mean, we've had maybe 5 acronyms in this conversation. In a normal conversation I have in a given day, I mean, it's hundreds. It's hundreds of acronyms per day. It's a completely different world. But then on top of that, going back to that idea that like the stakes for maybe a Space Force mission can involve lives. And then some of the incentive structures as well, you know, up until recently, it was almost never the case that, a leader in the military is not looking necessarily to downsize their forces. They want to make their forces more effective. So if I go and I pitch in the same way that I would pitch a business, like, look, I can replace half of your workforce, like the workforce isn't going to go away. And you don't want your workforce to go away in the military. You want to preserve them, but you want to enable them to be more effective and like accomplish their mission. And so there are some fundamental things like that if you don't understand kind of the core values and the core end goal for the customer, you're going to fall on your face. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there one particular kind of hard truth about selling to the government or government innovation that you think founders should hear, frankly, just should hear more often or earlier in the cycle that maybe doesn't get told? Like we kind of string the founders out for a while and then it's like, well, yeah, this is really, sorry, I should have told you that a year ago, but this is going to be a really hard process. Is there one of those things that like jumps above all the rest?
I mean, okay. So I worked with, it's a lot easier, I think, starting as American. I worked with Norwegians and we talked about this and they had a really hard time with the like, oh, like, I'll introduce you, or like, this sounds great, let's talk later, and this sounds great, that talks later is always very different than actual actionable next steps. But it's frustrating because it's so obvious, but where I see founders fail is the exact same place you see them fail anywhere else, is when they pitch and they don't listen. They don't do their customer discovery. They go into a meeting with maybe a fully functional product, not understanding all these constraints that we just talked about in the government, the constraints of having the 2,000 page manual of how you buy things. You can't go in and just say, hey, I have a solution. I can deploy it for you this fast and on this timeline. You're not understanding any of the actual pain points that the folks on the government have when it comes to how they buy, how they get buy-in, and who they have to convince along the way. So, the lack of curiosity or the lack of understanding of the concept of operations for your government customer, those are all things that just, I mean, they end the conversation immediately when people go in and they pitch without any of that understanding of the actual situation of the government customer.
I could totally see that. And I guess that's encouraging in the sense that like there are just some truths that are just transferable no matter whether we're selling to enterprise, we're selling to the consumers, we're selling to big government, which is that's heartening to know, but also a truth that needs to be told. All right, let's see. Before we get to our closing segment and our last question, let me see if I've been paying attention, because like if I'm going to see if I can string this together, if in the past, in my era, a long time ago, 30 plus years ago, right? Like one of the difficulties of trying to sell into the government, which was my responsibility in the state of New Mexico, was like, you don't have that public opportunity to like run into people from the government to do a lot of customer discovery, right? They were less accessible, let's just say, than like a commercial client where you could find where they hung out, as my dad used to say, right? So now let me see if I've been paying attention to this whole conversation, because if I'm an innovator in the space or defense sectors, and specifically here in Los Angeles, and I'm saying, I just heard Roxanne tell me that I need to be better at customer discovery, and I need to better understand the buyer's motivations and the departmental motivations and limitations and bureaucracies and the decision-making process that goes on inside that agency that I absolutely know our technology solution would be perfect for. Like, I got to find a way to get access to and meet and interact with and build relationships with and understanding with these people. Where can I do that? Because they're the government and they're just not open doors at the Space Force, like come in and learn about us. But I could go to the bridge in El Segundo that is built and facilitated by DTI. And while at the bridge for events, I could hypothetically then engage with people that are representatives that are coming from Space Force and the DOW and NASA and all these other places that are coming together. So now all of a sudden I'm in an environment that is a pseudo commercial environment that I'm pretty comfortable with as a founder. And I'm able to literally just like build relationships and explore topics and learn actually about what they do and how they do it. And then when that event is over and I'm like, holy cow, partner, I think we might have some opportunity to pursue, because I think I have a deeper understanding of what I learned from that general who's like retired and now works for Space Force, blah, blah, blah. Like, okay, cool. Like, what are we going to do? And then come Monday morning after that event, it's like, I'm dialing up Roxanne at DTI and I'm saying, hey, like, do you guys have any programs or services or accelerators or workshops or boot camps that we can go through? Or frankly, just do you offer the chance to help us understand this one-on-one so that we can then go like actually follow up on that conversation with that retired general that we met 2 weeks ago at your event? I feel like I might have figured I might be getting this right. If that's everything we just talked about, or did I miss anything?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And we do have those resources. We have 2 sessions a month, one in person, one virtual. We call them our Launchpad sessions, or exactly that. We normally discuss SBIR and STTR, getting your foot in the door, doing government customer discovery, all of the above. And we do have resources available kind of for those companies just getting started. And I will say too, though, for all that, I know the government's daunting, but they have been doing better. There are conferences. There's conferences across the U.S., and I'd be more than happy to talk to people about them. But in places like Florida, where some of the program offices for the Space Force are, they have Space Power and Space Com. They have Space Symposium. It's going to be different people at different locations, but they are accessible, and they do really care about the mission. And so it really has been a phenomenal group of people to be working alongside.
It's awesome, and good to hear that they've evolved for how they interact with the commercial sector over the last 35 years. That's great to see that they're not stuck in the same obstacles that I used to have to try and conquer when I was in Albuquerque for long sales
I can't
pitches.
say everyone's not the same, but
of course,
yeah.
no, of course, right? Okay, last question, and this is just about you. And maybe you as kind of a profile that might be inspiring or informative to other young people that are coming up behind you, right? If there's someone like you, a younger version of you, right, who's interested in getting into this sort of work in this industry, which is, we've already talked about, it's this unique confluence of creativity and traditional commercial market experience and people skills with this massive government industry. But like, there's someone who hears this and goes, oh my God, like, I want to be Roxanne. Like, this sounds fascinating to me, right? What would be 2 or 3 skills or experiences that person should intentionally then build in the next year or so of their lives to become valuable in this ecosystem as you see it going forward?
Oh, wow. That's a question. So, I think the one thing fundamentally that, like we mentioned, growing up in New Mexico where resources are limited, you have to learn how to find your people and get the repetitions, essentially. So I was super interested personally in, design thinking, and figuring out, startups and customer discovery. Every job I had in New Mexico, I built for myself. They didn't exist before. And so you do have to kind of fundamentally find some of the things you like doing, or at least can get excited about maybe doing them for free or doing them as a volunteer to just get those repetitions in. But like I mentioned, like if you can read books about it, oftentimes, I did eventually get that Silicon Valley job, and I was like, oh, okay, well, Yeah, it was the same stuff that was in the book, but now it's just a matter of how you execute it that's really important. So,
Love that.
and definitely there's no time for people that don't support you. You got to find, one piece of advice that I love, Cindy Gallup, who writes a lot about women um, in the workplace. One of her pieces is, women don't need mentors, they need champions. And so it's lovely if someone will sit around with you, and offer you feedback and give you advice. It's totally different once you find those people who actually will put you up for an opportunity. Once you find those people, hold them close, don't let them go. And hopefully, yeah, be that person for someone else. So.
I love that. I like, get your reps, right? Get your experiences, create them if you have to. Do your research, do your homework, right? Study about the places that you want to be, so you get an understanding of the glossary of terms, as we just did today. And then find champions, right? Not just mentors, right? Not just like people to aspire, like, but find champions that are gonna, as we would say, like, speak your name in rooms where you're not in there yet. That's incredible. I am immensely thankful to you. I told you before we went on air, like, this was a conversation that just the curiosity in me was like, man, like, I like Roxanne. That part's easy, but like, I want to know more about what she does and how she does it, because she doesn't seem to me like the prototypical person that I would have expected to be working on the government side with space tech. Like, so since we met each other, I've always been fascinated by this, which you've now given me the chance to explore in this conversation today. So I'm deeply appreciative of that. And then also, by the way, that you just taught me so much and our audience so much about like all of this that is going on in our government today, which, as you said, is our government exists to support and promote us, right? I mean, it's our tax dollars. Like, this is here to build the better version of our country and the world that we are paying for. So it's like hugely enlightening. And then just on a lighter note, honestly, like, I didn't know this much about Space Force until today, because prior to this, I just thought that Space Force was just a really funny Steve Carell show on Netflix that I watched a couple of years ago during the pandemic, which I think is an absolutely funny show that everybody should go watch. But clearly there is an actual Space Force with real people that are doing real important work, and you and DTI are from right here in LA are helping them do it and helping them build the better. As we say, we're trying to lead this world a little bit better through these conversations. And it sounds like you and DTI are literally helping Space Force to actually bring some of that to fruition. So I'm grateful for your work. Thank you for doing what you do, apparently, to help them. And then I'm also just super grateful for the conversation today before we head off into the holidays. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Rob. And thank you. I have to acknowledge the fact that you were one of the first people to take me to a coffee when I moved to LA. So thank you for welcoming me to the ecosystem, and I'll be forever grateful.
My pleasure. I'm trying to be a champion, not just a friend or a mentor, right? Trying to be a champion. That's what life is all about. All right. So before we go, let's make sure that people can find DTI, find you, or follow you on social if you want people to, or just like website addresses. Where do we find and follow the organization and or you?
Yeah, so easiest in terms of, since you're listening, dti.space. That's going to help you get to our Bridge website. The Bridge website is thebridge.space, but there's a dash instead of an I. So THEBR-DGE.space. Obviously, you can find us on LinkedIn. That's one of the best places to connect. We have a Luma page with all of our events, both virtual and in person. I would be really upset if I forgot to mention we just launched a new rideshare board. So it is a free service. So if you have a ride going to space that you're looking to take experiments or payloads on, or if you have something you're trying to get into space, it's kind of like a Craigslist board for just matching people and getting them into space. And that just went live. So it's a completely free service. Again, just the idea being that we're trying to mature this ecosystem and support each other as we, try and build the future of space.
Right. That's incredible. Thankfully you mentioned that nugget. And for reference sake, because whoever decided to design the website address for the Bridge that way, I get what they were doing creatively, like BR Bridge DGE. Very clever, but also very hard to explain. So the good news is we're going to put all this stuff in the show notes. So anybody that's listening or watching, they can find this. You'll find this in the show notes. So it will be clearly delineated, hot links. You can click on them and go right through to it. And ultimately do yourself the favor. If you are in this industry, or if you're innovating in this industry, if you are a student who is aspiring to pursue opportunities in this industry, or you're researching things at school that you think you have ideas around, and we have so many great universities here all around Southern California, which is another part of the pillar of this. Like, do yourself the favor. This is me speaking on her behalf. Like, go find Roxanne in your life. Go find DTI. Go hang out at the events at the Bridge. Shout out to our friend Jay Velasco from Deep SoCal Tech Week, who I didn't realize he was hosting those events at your place, but now he's going to laugh and he's going to be like, oh man, I can't believe you interviewed Roxanne. So shout out to that and our little circle of friendships here in Los Angeles. But again, just super grateful to have had you on today. Thank you for spending some time with us.
Thank you, Rob.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did recording it. As always, we thank you so much for listening and watching. Today's show was recorded here in Los Angeles and produced by the incomparable Deanna Bernal in Mexico City. You know, we can only grow this show by you listening and sharing the show with friends. So please find, like, follow, subscribe, and share our audio-only show on Spotify, Apple, or via any other popular podcasting platforms, as well as find the video version of our show now available on our YouTube channel over at Entrepreneurial Thinkers. And of course, you can follow along on our various social media platforms for fun and informative clips and content at Entrepreneurial Thinkers, wherever you can find us. And if you'd like to connect with me, you can find me at I Am Rob Ryan on just about any social media platform. Gracias, thank you, and have an awesome day.